Hello, this is Dr. Claire, and this is our lecture on the scientific method. So all scientists, including biologists, use the scientific method in order to investigate questions that they're interested in. So just remember, if you're doing science, keep calm and use the scientific method. So we're going to talk a little bit about the steps of the scientific method. You probably are familiar with this, and so hopefully this is going to seem pretty familiar. All right, so the first step, of course, is to make an observation. Now, in the case of biology, that's going to be an observation of the natural world, an observation of some sort of organism, something interesting that you've discovered. So you make an observation. You see something that is there that you're interested in. Then, from there, you start to ask questions. Why is this happening? What's going on? What do I think is the reason for this this particular observation? So then you're going to come up with a hypothesis. Your hypothesis is an explanation that answers your question. So let's take an example. Let's say that I'm interested in why some birds have red heads, really brightly colored red plumage. So I see that these birds have these red heads, and I think, oh, that's awfully obvious. Maybe that makes them easier to be found and eaten by predators. So why would you have such a bright colored plumage if that makes you more obvious? Okay, think about that for a question. There's my question. And then it could be, okay, well, maybe that plumage color helps them to attract a mate. Okay, so there's my hypothesis. Okay, and so then from there you would make some predictions. If this hypothesis is true, what would we expect to see? What could we detect that would support that hypothesis? So if my hypothesis is that the brightly colored red plumage on a bird helps it to attract a mate, then a prediction out of that might be that males or birds that have these more brightly colored feathers have more mates than birds that have less brightly colored feathers. So maybe you can find some different birds in the area and compare them to each other, see which ones are brighter, which ones are duller, and then see how many mates they're able to attract. Okay, so that would be an additional observation that I would then make. I would observe how many mates each of these birds have. Now, you can design an experiment, and oftentimes the best thing to do would be to design an experiment. So maybe I would take a red Sharpie and I'd make some of the males even brighter than others. That would be an experiment. Or maybe I just go out and I collect observations about the natural variation in that trait. Either one is actually perfectly acceptable. So you design and conduct your experiment, or you go and you collect your additional data, and then you analyze that data, usually using statistics, to determine if your predictions are statistically true. And you'll learn more about statistics further on in your biological career here at CSU Pueblo, but for now, just bear in mind that you want to have some sort of pretty solid evidence that your results, the data that you've collected, either support or don't support your hypothesis. So those are your two options. Your hypothesis is supported or it's not. So a lot of times in science, this happens all the time. You come up with this great hypothesis and you conduct an experiment, you collect your data, and your data does not support your hypothesis at all. And so you go, oh, okay, now what? Well, there's two possibilities. One, maybe your experiment wasn't very good. Maybe using red Sharpie to color the heads of these birds makes them stinky, because Sharpies stink and no one wants to mate with them. So maybe you should think about a different way to color the heads of the birds. Or maybe your hypothesis is wrong. And if your hypothesis is wrong, then maybe you need to go back and think of another reason why birds might have bright red colored plumage and test that hypothesis. Okay, so that happens all the time. It is not a problem for your hypothesis to be wrong. This is an incredibly common thing, and it does not mean that you're a bad scientist. It just means that you were wrong, you learn from your mistakes, and you try again. But sometimes you're lucky and you statistically test your results and you find that there is a significant effect there. So you find that indeed the birds with the brighter red heads have 3 mates, whereas the birds with the dull red heads only have 1. And you can conduct some statistical analysis on that and determine that it is a statistically significant result. Great. You've just supported your hypothesis. Note, I did not say that you prove your hypothesis. I want you all to remove the word prove from your vocabulary. In science, we do not prove things. We support things, okay? So you've supported your hypothesis. And then the great thing about science is then you've provided some support for your hypothesis. You think this is what's going on, and then hopefully another scientist somewhere else will actually go in and replicate your analysis. And perhaps they find the same thing that you found, and that lends more support to your hypothesis. So a hypothesis that is tested by many, many scientists and has lots and lots of support and doesn't have any cases where there's data that fails to support the hypothesis, those are what we eventually call scientific theories. Okay, so let's take a look at another example. So here's an observation. There are no more, well, okay, birds are technically dinosaurs. I'm a bird biologist. You're going to get lots of bird examples. Get used to it. Birds are technically dinosaurs. But aside from birds, there are no more dinosaurs on the planet. They went extinct. We have fossils that show us what they may have looked like, and lots of them. Dinosaurs once were probably the dominant land vertebrate on the planet, but they're no longer here. Okay, so what happened? Well, if you look at the rocks from which they find these dinosaur fossils, you'll see layers and layers and layers of rocks with dinosaur fossils, all of these layers of dinosaur fossils. And then there's this layer of rock that's full of uridium, and above the layer of rock that's full of uridium, no dinosaurs. Okay, so scientists made this observation. Now, uridium is an element that is found in high concentrations in meteors. Okay, so this is an observation that we've made of the fossil record. Lots of dinosaurs, layer of uridium, no dinosaurs. Okay, that's our observation. Now the question is, why is this layer of uridium present between those borders? Well, maybe a hypothesis might be that a large meteor struck the planet, caused massive destruction, and disrupted the communities on the land and the sea and caused the extinction of the dinosaurs. Okay, so there's a hypothesis. A big meteor struck the planet, and there was a huge explosion and a global winter, and the trees couldn't grow, and bad things happened, and poof, no more dinosaurs. Okay, all right. So that's our hypothesis. It is supported by that evidence of uridium, because uridium is found in meteors. So a layer of uridium all throughout the planet suggests that maybe a big meteor struck the planet, got turned into dust, and that dust settled throughout all over the surface of the planet. But what other predictions can we make based on that hypothesis? Well, if an enormous meteor that caused that much ecological damage struck the planet, you would expect to see other geological signals that would indicate that there had been a meteor strike. And so we can then go out and collect additional data and see if that supports our hypothesis. So you go out, and sure enough, there is some additional information that indicates that there was a very large meteor strike right around that time. In addition to uridium, there are these crystals, these quartz crystals. This is an image of one right here that I'm circling with the pointer. Those are only formed under very high temperature and very high pressure, like you would find if a very large meteor struck the planet. So those quartz crystals are interspersed, scattered with that uridium layer. And also, there is an enormous crater right off the Yucatan Peninsula that dates to the same time when the dinosaurs went extinct. So that would be where that enormous meteor struck the planet. So this is an image of that crater. So the Yucatan is right here in southern Mexico, and then this is the image of that crater. So we still have that evidence of that crater in Mexico. And based on estimates from the size of this crater, they have approximated that the meteor that created that crater was approximately the size of the island of Manhattan. So a really, really big chunk of rock. All right. So what can you conclude from these observations? Hopefully you just said to yourself, this supports my hypothesis. right? So it supports your hypothesis. It does not prove your hypothesis, but it does provide more support. And over time, we can build that support to figure out what has happened and what is happening now. Okay, that's it. Have a good day.